This is The Roadmap with Ted Jenkin.
Hey everybody, welcome to The Roadmap. I'm your host, Ted Jenkin. This show is exclusively on America's Small Business Network. Every week, for a long time now, I try and bring you some of the brightest and best entrepreneurs and CEOs, just thinkers about how do you start a business, grow a business, and one day, maybe you too, can exit stage left. I've got my friend today, Gump. He's created a tremendous book called The Inside Innovator, and I want to talk about that. And you also own Cambian, and it's just an amazing firm. But I just want to kick off into this because you've always been in sort of this mobile business. You've been a technology guy. We're on media today. Like, where do you, Louis, because you're a big time thinker in here, I'd say a big brain thinker. Where do you see the industry headed today when it comes to media?
Well, thanks for asking. First, it's a real pleasure to be here. With media, it's an exciting time. It's a disruptive time. A lot of things are changing. One of the biggest trends is fragmentation.
Fragmentation.
Absolutely. So audiences are getting more and more of what they want in smaller and smaller groups, except for certain events like the Super Bowl, let's say.
Right.
So media companies that are really engaged in this then are following the trends, they're understanding what people want, and then they're saying, hey, let's make great content and let's also meet the audience where they are.
Are you a believer that legacy media is dying and going to be dead one day, or do you still think it will have a place in media overall?
Legacy media does not have to continue to be legacy. It does, however, have to reinvent itself.
It does because, right, we saw even in this latest election that there are a lot of people today that get all their news on TikTok and Instagram. There are some people that listen to one or two dedicated podcasts. They may go on Twitch. I mean, all sorts of places. That's what you see the fragmentation being in the future?
I think I see a lot of that. I also see people always wanting great content. They want the news that matters to them, the entertainment that matters to them, and they want it on a platform that's relevant. One of the things that really on-point media companies will do is not only create the content for the user, but also understand the delivery channel and platform and meet the readers, the viewers where they are.
I think you're right because I think it's interesting when you look at just a small segment of TV, like late night talk show host, and you have the people on there like Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert, and they're getting crushed right now by Greg Gutfeld. Like Gutfeld, Variety just wrote an article and said he's become the king of late night. So is that, do you think that's happening because of politics or just the way that people are choosing their media?
Well, politics is affecting a lot of things these days. However, I think it's more fundamental than that. I think what we're seeing, for example, is a move from scheduled programming to on-demand programming. And when you have on-demand, people can choose what they want even more.
Right.
I do hope that we see among the audience an open-mindedness and a willingness to look at things that aren't straight down the middle of what you exactly already believe, and instead we continue to learn.
I think this is an interesting leadership lesson, and great we're talking about this because we're going to talk about both sides of entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. But I remember reading a Harvard Business Review article many years ago about this notion of the evidence confirming trap. And this concept that even when you look at media as a leader or an individual, you watch the same shows, the same programming, and you do sort of get programmed that way to think this is the view of the world. That can happen to a lot of people in media, can it?
Not only can it happen, it is happening. There's lots of evidence to support that. Here's one thing that some of us can do if we really want to see different perspectives. There are a lot of news sources out there. So pick two or three that don't duplicate each other.
It's not the same one.
And not the same one. And not only not the same one in brand, but also not the same one either in perspective or starting place. You might get a domestic and an international view. If you're thinking about different sides of the political spectrum, look at one from one side and one from the other. And I'm not judging in any event. I'm just saying if we get more perspectives from more places, we can be more informed within the electorate.
So here's an idea, folks. Try one night, watch a little bit of Fox, a little bit of MSNBC, then maybe a little BBC. You might get all of it and get a somewhat different viewpoint about the media altogether. I want to turn to your book because I think it's quite fascinating that there are a lot of people today that are in corporate America, and they're not quite entrepreneurs in the sense that they may not be able to risk financial capital. They don't want to risk all that human capital. But you wrote this book, The Inside Innovator, all about intrapreneurship. Can you explain to people what that is first? What is intrapreneurship?
I sure can. So intrapreneurship is the practice of creating value through innovation and growth within a larger organization. And it's possible to break that down. It's a real practice. It's a discipline. It creates value. It's not just about tinkering or experimenting.
Right.
On the other hand, innovation is involved and growth is required. It's about moving forward, and it's about doing it in a larger organization. It could be a large multinational corporation, or it could be a small local company, often market leaders. And it could also be a charitable nonprofit or a university. So there are lots of places for inside innovation to happen.
Yeah, because I think if you're that person that you're watching the program today and you're in a company and you're constantly feeling frustrated, like, why does the company do it this way? Or, I think there's a better way to get revenue in the company or a better way to make it more efficient. How do you go about that to share your ideas, to try to create that innovation, but not upset the apple cart at the same time? How does that work?
It's so hard a lot of the time. A lot of our organizations seem like they're naturally set up to resist change. I bet a lot of people who are listening here can relate to this, and people who are watching, they're saying, oh my gosh, either I see opportunity, we're already doing well, but I think we can do more. Or so many people that I run into, they say, there's this amazing opportunity to grow, but I feel stuck. And there are very specific practices that you can have to make sure that you continue to grow. One of the most important ones is having a group of people around you. Within a larger organization, you can't operate like an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, if you're the founder, if you're the owner, a lot of the times you can say, this is what I think we should do, let's go. The intrapreneur generally can't do that, at least can't do it as easily. But if you have a group of supporters laterally, especially if your boss is an advocate, that tends to bring about some great results.
Let's break that down, because I remember early in my leadership career when I was in corporate America, they used to talk about the 3 buckets. Bucket 1 being things you can control, bucket 2 being things you can influence, and bucket 3, things you can't control and you can't influence. And so I think in a large organization, I want you to talk about this. Bucket 2 is really important because you really don't have a lot of control, and there are things that are out of your control and influence, but how do you use your influence to create change and innovation as an entrepreneur?
Well, we could talk about this all day long. However, that said, here are 2 or 3 things to think about. Number 1, understand the company's strategy. Understand where you have a right to play. Because if
what does that mean when you have a right to play?
Well, let's say, for example, that you've got a restaurant, and it's one of the most popular restaurants around, and then you come up with an idea, and this restaurant is great at locally sourced ingredients, and you got all these fans, and you're like, I want to do something more. If you come up with a way to expand on that, maybe you do the takeout portion in addition to the dine-in portion, that's a place where you have a right to play. On the other hand, if you come up with an idea for a green dry cleaner, for example, that doesn't sound so logical. Maybe it's a great idea, but it doesn't sound like it's quite as much in the middle of what you could reasonably do in a reasonable amount of time.
I think that it's smart you're telling people this, because I look at a publicly traded company like Cracker Barrel, and I think they're a great story right now for people that follow their stock. This is not advice, by the way, to buy Cracker Barrel, just so you know. But I would say this because they did 2 things. Cracker Barrel is really suffering, and somebody innovated as an entrepreneur in there and said, number 1, let's serve alcohol. A lot of people said, who's going to go to Cracker Barrel and have alcohol? And 2, they started doing takeaway or takeout meals. And that typically wasn't the Cracker Barrel model, and their stock has doubled pretty fast, over the past 12 months. I mean, there are little things like that you can do in big companies like you're talking about to innovate.
100%, which brings me to another thing that's really important, both for people within the organization, all around it, and also especially for the most senior executives. You have to be able to listen, because so often the answers to what you should do are actually right inside the company. You got people who have been there, done that. Hey, it's okay if you go talk with consultants or somebody outside. It's okay if you read about ideas and brainstorm, but a lot of that comes right from within. Our organizations too often are closed to ideas. No, we're too busy, or no, it's not in the plan. We don't have the funds for that. Right. If companies are disciplined about listening and allocating funds, it's amazing what you can find that's really your next great growth opportunity.
One of the flaws of a lot of entrepreneurs is they don't build SOP, or standard operating procedures. And one of the great things about gigantic companies is they're almost fully built on a set of standard operating procedures. And a lot of employees that work at big companies, I know they don't realize this, How do you alter those things to create more efficiency, knowing there's this machine of procedures that are set so the company doesn't fail, so it operates efficiently? How do you balance that fight?
Well, it's a very difficult balancing act. And my position is everybody has responsibility. This isn't just about the CEO making it possible to innovate. On the other hand, the senior executives within the company have to create an environment where voices can be heard. Because if they don't do that, then people will just be quiet and they'll do their job. What I would say also is if you're a person who's leading a team, leading an initiative, if you have a great idea, don't let the goo of a large organization stop you at the first or second step. There are all sorts of ways to find a path to surface these ideas because generally speaking, organizations are looking for a way to grow. One of the best ones is if you have a good relationship with your boss. Because then you have an advocate, and when you're not in the room, they can help to explain an idea and make sure that it gets a good hearing.
Do you find a lot of employees and even VPs or senior leaders will get into self-preservation mode in companies, meaning that they won't say a lot, they won't try to innovate because they're afraid of hurting their rating or the stock options or whatever it may be? Do you see a lot of that when you work with companies?
It happens all the time, unfortunately, and there are pretty straightforward ways to change that. That, from my perspective, has to come from the top. It's the culture, it's the expectation, and at the same time, each of us needs to kind of say it, own it, do it.
Right.
And if we're a leader inside a company, let's get outside of our comfort zone. Let's push a little bit. Let's be mindful of the culture. Let's be mindful of the timing. But at the end of the day, our job is to contribute. And if we keep in mind that focus on contribution versus self-preservation, a whole lot of good things can happen.
How do you know, I want to shift gears a little bit, how do you know when it's time for you to go? The time where you're saying, listen, I bucked the trend here, I'm getting beat up in my ratings, I don't feel like I'm making any progress. Like, how do you know when's the right time to jump from being that intrapreneur to leaving the company and starting your own journey and becoming an entrepreneur?
So this is another topic with many, many things we could say about it. Some of it is by feel, but there are a few things that you can take signals from. One is if you keep raising ideas that are consistent with strategy that the company can reasonably execute on, and for whatever reason, they just aren't making traction.
Right.
Okay? Another one is if you're making some traction, but the environment means that you have all sorts of organizational friction. This doesn't have to be the hardest thing you ever did. Typically, in my experience, for example, building the mobile business at the Weather Channel, we had an environment where we were asked to bring ideas forward. Isn't that great? And I had a wonderful boss. It was kind of the best of all worlds, but it wasn't easy. We were still frugal and we had to persuade people to do things. If we hadn't had that, then other companies would have innovated. So I think it's a combination of surfacing ideas for a hearing, making real traction over a reasonable period of time, and feeling like what you're doing is consistent with the company strategy. If you can get those things, then you stay. And if not, maybe you move along. And by the way, if you have to do that, generally speaking, it's a bigger loss for the company than it is for you.
There's nothing like doing an interview on the couch, which I've done many times with Jim Cantori and Steph Abrams. I have to say they're two of the best co-hosts in all the shows that I've been on over time. Cantori's unbelievable.
They're both great. And as it happens, when I was at the Weather Channel, Jim really helped us to popularize mobile content consumption on these devices. He would be out in the storm and he loved gadgets. And so he would take the newest phone from one of the wireless carriers and show people how they could use it out in the field. And then in the case of Stephanie Abrams, she really helped us get our mobile business off the ground.
Did she really?
She was great. Yeah.
Yeah, she's been there so long. She's an amazing host, both of them. But when you built this mobile business for the Weather Channel, I keep thinking today that so many businesses have to build a mobile presence. AI is coming in there now. How do you see AI changing this whole experience for users inside the mobile platform?
So first of all, I think AI is every bit as big as people say it is.
You do?
It's a very big wave. At a certain point, there are limitations, of course, but this is a major wave of technological change that's coming through our world. And anyone who chooses to ignore it, they do that at their own peril. On the other hand, there are lots of opportunities, and we have to manage the challenges that come with it. What I would also say is let's put it in context. We've seen waves of change driven by technology over the last even, let's say, 30 years. You could go back earlier than that are fairly distinct, and they have brought all sorts of benefits to people around the world. Let's take the internet itself and the growth of the internet, let's say, into the 90s, which led to the desktop web, which led to mobile, which led to, in a media case, streaming and beyond. So I think what we would be wise to do is think of this as another wave of innovation versus a thing we've never seen before.
Yeah, I remember when people thought Netflix was nothing, and now it's $1,000 a share. And even Netflix went through a lot of rocky roads, if you will, and then became fairly dominant. But stream is really the future, right? It's so funny how cable got blown apart. Everyone's buying all these streaming channels. Then they're probably going to be paying more than they were for cable by the time they add up collectively all those streaming subscriptions. Do you think there'll be consolidation? Do you see that pendulum swinging and it will consolidate backwards again?
Well, it's going to consolidate in some ways. I don't know if it's going to be backwards, forwards, or sideways. We're going to find out. What I can share with you is that this issue of fragmentation and paying so much for individual services that it's more than you paid before for the cable bundle, that was predicted 20, 30 years ago. There was this whole discussion about a la carte and, a debate in the environment, and then here we go. We're in a place where not only can it be more expensive, but also it's hard to find what you want. So I would say absolutely we're going to see new forms of aggregation of media that make it easy for people to find the content they want.
Maybe you and I need to do that app. I would love an app where I go in and just tell me what it is I want to watch, and then it will show me all the places I can actually find it, because that's the hardest part, going between streaming subscriptions to figure out what shows you want to watch unless you get a tip on something good. Do you today in Cambian Solutions, will you coach organizations on this kind of stuff?
Yes, 100%. So with Cambian Solutions today, I'm really focused on 2 or 3 things. The first one goes back to the book and the concepts in the Inside Innovator. It's about the foundations of entrepreneurship and how you can go from aspiring to innovate to actually making it happen. The second one is growth plans and just helping companies figure out, okay, we're here, we'd like to go there, we want to serve our customers, how do we do that? And then beyond that, it's advisory services for senior executives who are focused on growth, typically people who are high potential and high performing who just want to do better. And my job is to make sure that they achieve even more of their full potential.
So you'll take an entrepreneur or you'll take a C-suite team from a big Fortune 500 company and work with them as well on sort of both sides of the aisle.
100%. And I find myself especially having conversations with people in small to mid-sized companies, because a lot of the larger companies have big training and development organizations.
Right.
These small to mid-sized ones, they have ambitions that are broad, thoughtful. They are looking for ways to do great things, but they don't necessarily have as many resources, and I can make a particularly big impact there.
I like that. How can people at home get a copy of the book? Where can they find that?
Well, the easiest place is probably Amazon. Just go type in Inside Innovator by Louis Gump, and it's right there. They can also go to my website, louisgump.com, for more options.
Thank you so much, Louis, for coming on the program today. Folks, what's exciting about this, and the reason I want to interview Louis today, is that wherever you are in your career, if you work in a big company, you can actually be that entrepreneur as an intrapreneur inside of an organization. You should read the Inside Innovator. If you're willing to leave, yes, you got to risk a little bit more capital, you got to risk a little bit more money, but if you do all that, you might be able to be successful as an entrepreneur. Thanks as always of watching The Roadmap today. I'm Ted Jenkins, your host, and this show is exclusively on America's Small Business Network. See you next week.
Thanks for watching The Roadmap with Ted Jenkins.